inaugurated in the framework of Gay Pride for 2022. This is entitled A Different Arab Diversity, LGTBI Fictions by Saleem Haddad. We're very pleased to have him on board, and I read his book a couple of years ago. I read it in English, and then I realized it was translated into Spanish instead of being called Pretty last night in the Pretty. And but the publishers will tell us the reasons why, and the reason why they chose the adjective Umbar from an Arab city that is undefined. And this is undoubtedly, for those who have not read it, I highly recommend it. And it is part of what motivated us to bring Saleem with us today, not only to show his latest novel, but also to talk about this short feature film. So summer brings us heat waves and for many nights of euphoria and celebration in the colors of the rainbow. Of course, we know that much ground has been gained in terms of human rights since the day of the Stonewall riots inaugurated the LGBT liberation movement in the United States half a century ago. But in this 2022, as we see virulent wars raging in Eastern Europe, tensions in the South and the southern neighborhood, the repeal of abortion in the United States, or the discourses of xenophobia and intolerance in our neighborhoods, those milestones we thought we had reached seem fragile and come to remind us that the freedoms we have achieved are not a gift, but the result of social struggles, and that they are not guaranteed. The situation in the Middle East and North Africa, which is primary in this house, has never been easy. But things have not moved forward with the winds of change in the Middle East and North Africa, of the so-called Arab Springs, which have been extinguished by repression and counteroffensives of what is known as the deep state. Although people are still optimistic, thinking that this was a sacrifice that will then ultimately allow to see the long run change and the changes in societies. One of the cities that arguably allowed for greater freedom is undoubtedly Beirut, Lebanon, being a country where the weakness of the central state offers alternative spaces that in other Arab nations do not exist. However, after the tragic explosion and the resounding economic crisis, the fabric has been torn apart. It's even broken. In the exhibition we have right now, if you haven't had the chance to enjoy it, you have the two rooms on the ground floor where you can visit lights or shadows of what was and still is, which includes the work of 12 photographers belonging to the collective 1,200 artists that arose almost spontaneously from the economic crisis, in view of the need to generate constant support networks amidst a context of growing uncertainty. One of the artists is Omar Gabriel, who belongs to the Lebanese LGTBI collective or group. In his work, Four Walls, he refers to the security bubble that the queer community in Lebanon has to take a refuge in, as their lifestyle does not conform to the expectations of the rest of the city or the society. A few weeks ago, the Guardian's website published a documentary entitled The Queer Revolution in the Middle East, starring the band Mashru Leila, and various other defenders of sexual diversity in the Arab world. It explicitly mentions the suicide of the young Egyptian lesbian Sarah Hegazi after her imprisonment for flying the rainbow flag during a concert by Mashru Leila. Here in Spain, the vigil of the murder of Samuel Luis, the young man killed on the 3rd of July 2021 in A Coruña, which also paid tribute to so many victims of the LGBTI phobia. So we certainly have a lot to reflect upon. For instance, the condition of the migrant who arrives facing the fear of being in a place that can, where you can be expelled from at any moment. People of diverse sexual orientations and identities who are undocumented, and they do face a double discrimination that has led to critical pride to focus on them this year. And in view of the commoditization of the LGBTI pride, of which we will undoubtedly be able to see the inequalities, they really focused on migrants and racialized people. A few years ago, we started with a slogan, "With borders, there's no pride." But this year, we wanted to ally ourselves with the new campaign, the Now campaign, and we can take part in the Q&A session. This is certainly not an act with statistics or bills of law, but it's to make visible, albeit in fiction, the LGBTI lives in the Middle East, both within its borders and in fiction. LGBTI lives in the Middle East, in Madrid, as well as in London and Lisbon. Casa Árabe these days has illuminated its facade with the colours of diversity and brings you this panel to celebrate Pride 2022. The event will consist of the screening of the short film Marco and a debate on the book by Saleem Haddad last night in the Guapa, published by the Welsh publishers with whom we have collaborated for this event. Jimena, González, Gómez, Enrique, Aparicio will also join us, and I will introduce them after we watch the film. Thank you very much for coming, for your support, and see you in 20 minutes.
حبيبي عمر، بدي اقول لك بس انه بيك هلا طلع من اوضه العمليات. الدكتور قال انه العمليه كانت كتير منيحه، الحمد لله. هلا عم يرتاح، بس على كل حال أنا برجع بحكيك لحتى تقدر تحكي أنت شي كلمتين. كتير بحب يسمع صوتك حبيبي، حتى لو ل5 دقايق.
Hi, Marco.
Come in. Would you like something to drink?
Water, please.
Please sit down. You said you're from Spain. How long have you been in London?
Maybe 1 month?
Are you enjoying the city? Let's go inside. No, leave those on. I like socks. You like London? It's a great city to get lost in.
Is this okay?
Where in Spain are you from?
Barcelona.
Barcelona, huh? I like Barcelona. بس لعلمك الإسبان بلفظوها برثالونا مش برشلونة.
أنت بتحكي عربي؟
ايه أنا لبناني. It's okay. It's okay. أنت شو؟ سوري؟ أنا لبناني؟
أنا سوري من الشام. وبصراحة اسمي مو ماركو، أحمد.
عمر.
اسم أبي عمر. من وين بلبنان؟ بليز رجع تسطح، خليني أكمل لك المساج. متأسف إنه انصدمت، بس ماني مصدق إنك تحكي عربي. صار لي حوالي 8 أشهر ما حكيت عربي، يمكن من وقت كاليه آخر الصيفية الماضية.
كاليه. كاليه يعني مثل المخيم؟
ايه، أنا جيت من هنيك، ركبت على حوية شحن. أنت بتعرف كيف نظامهم، بزتوك بهالديتنشن سنتر مثل الكلب. احتجزوني شي 8 أشهر وبعدين زتوني إنه يلا الله معك. بس الحمد لله موعدي مع الهوم أوفيس الأسبوع الجاي.
بليز خليك اللي ما بيعطوك مصاري او سبورت او شيء.
عن جد ما بتعرف كيف نظامهم. ما بيطلعوك ليكونوا حاضرين يتعاملوا بملفك، بعدين بيعطوك 30 باوند بالأسبوع والله معك. المهم هذا هو السيستم. الحمد لله أحسن من بلا، بس مضطر دبر حالي صرت ماركو. عادي، كلها وظيفة، مو بطالة، وبتعرف على ناس.
انت شاطر بالمساج.
أكيد شاطر وقاري كبير. تعرف عن جد بعدني ما مصدق إنك تحكي عربي. ذكرتني بالشام، مثل كأنه الله جابني على باب بيتك الليلة.
ليك اذا بدك تجيب سيرة الله، صار بدك كمان جوينت. صحتين.
شكرا. حاطط عليها سماق كتير طيبة، مثل ما بنعملها بالبيت. عن جد شكرا.
كلها بايتين.
سهران معك الليلة، مهموم وسارح بخيالي.
ما كنت ملاحظ على حالي. الغنية كانت كل مهل بآخر صيفية اللي ببيروت. يمكن صار لي 10 أو 11 سنة مش سامعها. غريب.
جربت سنين طويلة ما قدرت نشيلك من بالي.
برشلونة بيقول انه اسباني. ما في ولا شخص اسباني بيقول برشلونة.
كيف قلت اللي أولى؟ برشلونة؟
سي
برشلونة.
احسن. طيب قل لهم انك سوري لكن شو فيها؟
قل لهم إني سوري. مجنون أنت. مستحيل. في منهم يمكن حيخافوا إذا بتقلن، أو حتى يزعلوا عليك. في منهم أأمن لهم يفكروك بشي مختلف، مو إنسان. Not good for business.
عندك بيرسي؟
عملتها بتركيا بس اضطريت شيلها.
ليش؟
بلا ما نحكي بهالمواضيع.
شو هلا ما بدك تحكي؟
عم نام بجامع بوايت شابل، مو مناسبة لهم.
ليش هاني؟ يعني ما شكلك شخص religious.
انت قديش صار لك هون يا استاذ ريليجيوس؟
شي 10 سنين.
يعني معك الباسبور؟
اكيد اخذته السنة الماضية.
مبروك. صار فيك تروح وين ما بدك بالعالم. واهلك هون؟
بلبنان.
وما بتزورهم؟
لا ما بدي وجع راس.
شو هو وجع الراس؟ اهلك ولا البلد؟
الاثنين.
تعرف أنا عم صير كتير اشتاق للشام. عم اشتاق لأغرب الشغلات. تعرف مثل شو؟ ريحة المازوت. كانت ريحة المازوت توجع لي راسي. هلأ إذا صدفت ماشي بالشارع وشميتها بيجي لأبكي.
عندك عائلة هون؟
لا، أمي وأبي كبار بالعمر، ما بيتحملوا الدنجي من تركيا. بس الحمد لله هن مناح. حصير ابعت لهم مصاري. ما عندهم حدا غيري هلا. كان في اختي، بس المهم ما عندهم حدا غيري. وبطريقة ما عندهم يعني بقى.
أكيد فهمانين ليش تركت.
بعرف فهمانين. أصلا هن اللي قالوا لي روحوا كل شي بيزبط إن شاء الله. أهم شي الموعد مع الهوم أوفيس الأسبوع الجاي يمشي تمام. ولي اغلط لي بشي معلومة سخيفة. هذا اللي بعد ناقص. وبعدين بلاقي لي شغل وبيت وبجيب لأهلي هون بالجو. بلا دنجي بلا حويد شحن بلا بطيخ مبسمر. بس أوقات عقلي بيصير بفكر بأشياء ما أقدر أتحكم فيها. فرضاً لو صار شي وأنا هون، بيي مريض، مو شي خطير يعني، معه سكري، بس كمان بقلق شو لو صار شي أخطر. أنا علقان وما قادر سافر، ورائي مع الهوم أوفيس. شو بعمل وقتها؟ بتفرج على أبي عم بيموت على السكايب. أوقات بتجيني هواجس وبحس كأنه قلبي حينفجر، كأني ما قادر أتنفس. بس كل شي حيزبط، أنا متأكد إنه كل شي حيزبط. مثل ما الله جابني على باب بيتك الليلة، واحد عربي وبيحكي عربي واسمه مثل اسم أبي.
You took the other cash, right? Look, this is double the amount we agreed.
أنت مفكرني شخص سيء؟ لأني عم بشتغل هيك؟
شو؟
أو
لا لا أبداً.
طيب رجع تسطح وخليني أكمل لك المساج.
عن جد مش ضروري، بس بليز خذ المصاري. خليني أقول لك شيء، الحياة بهالمدينة مش رح تكون هينة. هالمدينة مش منيحة للأشخاص مثلك. Take the money, Marco. Hi, Mama.
Hi, my name is Marco. I'm from Barcelona. Barcelona.
Bien.
Okay then. Congratulations.
For that short film. Perdón, vamos a, si podéis por ahí pedirle a la compañera.
Could you just ask Safada to bring Saleem some headsets, please, for simultaneous interpreting? Thank you very much.
Bueno, voy a...
Okay then, so I'm going to make a brief introduction and introduce you to the people who are accompanying us this evening. Saleem Haddad was born in the city of Kuwait from a Iraqi-German mother and a Palestinian Lebanese father. And he's worked with Médecins Sans Frontières and other international organizations in Yemen, Syria and Libya, Lebanon and Egypt. And his first novel, Last Night in the Guapa, was published in 2016. Over here, please. And he received praise. Do you understand English or Spanish? Okay, you don't need headsets then. So, as I was saying, his first novel, The Last Night in the Guapa, was published in 2016. And he received quite a lot of praise from reviewers in The New Yorker, The Guardian, and others, and received the Stonewall Award and the Polari First Book Prize in 2017. Saleem was also selected as one of the 100 best global thinkers in 2016 by the Foreign Policy magazine, and his writings has been supported by institutions such as Yaddo and Literature's Colloquium Berlin. And his beginning as a director, which of Marco that we've just seen, was premiered in March of 2019, and he was nominated for the Iris Award in 2019 for the best British short film. Thank you very much, Saleem, for being here with us. And we also have Jimena González Gómez, who has a degree in Arabic philology from the Complutense University and is has a doctorate in Romanesque philology, and from the University of Seville has been a teacher of Spanish and foreign language and researcher in the TESIC at the University of Seville and in several foreign universities such as Venice, Munich and Brno. She reads and writes all that she can and currently represents Mas Madrid on the local authorities in Chamberí here in Madrid. Thank you, Jimena, for being here with us. And Enrique Aparicio is a freelance cultural journalist, and he collaborates with Jazz.es, Picara Magazine, Cinemania, JMS Pop, all the Cinema Academy magazine, and he was awarded the Size Pop Award and the young short story for young people short stories in 2017, and received the prize of Franco Rabil from cinema journalism in 2020, and as creator together with Beatriz Cepeda of Can I Speak, and he has done a live show. Thank you very much, Enrique, for being here with us this evening, and thank you, as I say, to the publishing Editorial Egales for helping us to bring together this panel this evening. So the idea of bringing Jimena and Enrique here today is because we'll be able to talk about the short film that we have just watched, a short film which I believe is wonderful because it talks about several things that I mentioned in my introduction. Not only because of that is it wonderful, but more because there are many subjects that are of concern to the group, and in some ways we could say in a very subtle manner, such as how to talk about going through Calais, through a detention centre for refugees who attempt to reach the UK, or even when it was talking about Syria that's disappeared, and to some extent he's talking about a conflict there that has been going on for many years and that has ruined a country totally and has expelled its LGBT group and the social fabric there. And so I think that I've already spoken perhaps too much, so it would be maybe nice if you could take the floor, all of you, and you could give your first reactions or ask any questions with regards to Saleem's short film. Enrique is more on the side of cinema and Jimena is more on the part of novels, but you're very welcome to start, you, Enrique, if you like. Yes, I think that between both of us, we'll be able to cover both these fields. Can you hear my translation, Saleem? Yes, good. I think that the short film is a wonderful treasure finding for those of us who aren't very familiar with the intersection of gay matters, LGBTQ+, and Arabic identity. And I think that the center part of this short film lies in the response of Ahmed when he says, why don't you say who you truly are? And he says, well, because some people become frightened, others you inspire compassion, and others start treating you as something different. You're no longer a person. And so I believe that it is there where we have a lot to learn, those of us who are not familiar with the reality of the Arabic LGBTIQ+, and so it kind of like allows us to explore that intersection in this short film and to bring us closer through teaching this to us, to those of us who have no idea what the situation is.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, and I think part of the reason...
Sorry, Saleem, it's better if it's not near the mic. Yes, thank you.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. And I think part of the reason that what I was interested in exploring in the film was this idea of how refugees are perceived and the impossibility of being unperceived. Because I found myself very troubled by when the Syrian refugee crisis happened, I was in London, and seeing the coverage of it was really difficult because there was a dehumanization process that was going on, and it was going on all facets, even among the left and the progressive media that was calling for welcoming the refugees in. I still felt that there was this kind of process of dehumanizing through kind of holding up the refugee as this innocent creature that needs support, this helpless, angelic creature that needs support, and us as the civilized Europeans will be saving them. And by doing so, we will be saving ourselves. It was this very kind of Christian mythological idea of salvation. And when I was writing the film, I thought, can I try and remove this gaze? And what happens if I try and remove this gaze and just make it between these two Arab men? But then I also realized that within these two Arab men, there are these complications as well that come about through different perceptions. And Marco giving the money away at the end was his way of somehow maybe reclaiming agency for himself and refusing this idea of this false compassion in order for Omar to kind of feel better about himself.
Should I go now? Yes. Well, to begin with, thank you ever so much for having invited me to come here. I'm really pleased.
For both the short film and the book.
Thank you.
La verdad es que ha sido todo.
To tell you the truth, it has been a true finding, and I believe that, as you were saying, the occasion couldn't be more suitable in this pride that we're trying to claim for ourselves, and for us to be able to talk about this short film and this novel. And I fully agree with this analysis on Marco in terms of this short film. And in fact, I already saw the short film yesterday, just after finishing the novel, and there was something that made me imagine what Omar's character was like, the one who gives him the money, and I thought that maybe he could be the kind of Rasa, the main character in The Last Night in Guapa, who never returned to his country of origin, that he gave up that part of his identity in order to be able to live with more freedom. And it seemed to me that it was very interesting, because I also believe that in addition to it having a very powerful discourse and narrative on the right to be able to live freely where every person needs to live, there's also a very strong narrative and discourse, both in the short film and in the novel that we'll discuss in more depth, on the formation of identity in many different aspects, identity, sexual identity, national identity, religious identity, cultural identity. And I think that there is that connection, that link between Omar's character and a Rasa who never returned home. I don't know whether you see that as being the case.
So you mean Omar as Rasa who never returned home, not Rasa who never returned home?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I think so. And in fact, I think that there are similarities, and maybe, Omar is, because the ending of Guapa is, of Ultima Noche and Guapa is left very ambiguous. You don't know what Rasa will decide to do. Will he stay? Will he go? And I think maybe Omar is the in some cases cynical, in some cases ambitious.
Yes.
Depends how you look at it. Choice. And I think also Omar also has been away for a long time, that I think the cynicism has grown for him a lot. Yeah, and I do see those parallels. I didn't think of them until you mentioned them, but I think that's true, definitely.
The formation of the identity of both main characters, both protagonists of the short film, I think that the idea of having no roots really does lie in both of those vital positions from two opposing perspectives also, and that's why there was this final conflict when there's that longing for home, that connection one feels still with home, even though life has treated him harshly. The other one feels it's like an attack. The one who's in a privileged position in a really expensive flat with a wonderful piano, and he realizes that perhaps he's abandoned and lost more things than the other character, even though in material terms he has a lot more seemingly. But of course, all these matters with regards to LGBTIQ plus, those of us in our generation, aren't really so familiar with TikTok and other such things, and we've had to form our identity and become adults on many occasions by fleeing. That's the term. We've had to flee from our homes and our families. We've had to flee from the system that has forced us to remain on alert at all times. And I don't know to what extent in the Arab environment where this feeling of being rootless, this especially for refugees, overlaps with the complete feeling of having no roots because you've had to flee from your home for economic reasons because of international conflicts and wars. So I don't know how one can manage so many things happening at the same time. And I don't know what room that leaves then for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think the decision to flee or the decision to leave home it's not a straightforward one, I think, in terms of saying I've left because of my sexuality or I think there are so many different reasons, especially for those of us from the Middle East and those of us who are queer and from the Middle East. My decision to leave the Middle East 15 years ago now was very complicated, and my sexuality was one element of it, but it wasn't the only element. There were so many other political and economic reasons. There was class-based reasons. I was in Jordan at the time, and I left partly because, I'm originally Palestinian, and so, and I'm not from like a big, powerful Palestinian family, and I knew that no matter how much I try and achieve, my family background and the fact that I'm Palestinian will always stop me from getting what I feel I deserve, because I work hard and I'm good at what I do. And that was the primary decision for me to leave. My sexuality was one of them, but I think it was, it's this complicated configuration of reasons, and at least in this film, I think there's ambiguity about why Omar left. We don't really know. Did he leave because of his sexuality? Did he leave for economic reasons because he's from Lebanon and the economic situation isn't great? I wouldn't think so, given where he lives at the moment. Did he leave because he has a troubled relationship with his family, which we kind of understood? I wanted to leave this ambiguity open because I think the reasons people leave are also very complicated.
I wanted to ask about we've touched upon the identity of both Omar and Ahmed, and they are both in a way quite I wouldn't say archetypical, but one seems to be from a quite high bourgeois accommodated place, and the other one is a refugee from Syria, from a family that doesn't seem to be well off, no? And there is a clear distinction between these two very different, they come from very different families somehow, and yet they share, as Enrique was saying, the same uprooting, but they face it differently as well. There is, there's these nuances that I think you wanted to convey also in showing how maybe, whereas these two men share the same sexual orientation, they definitely do not share the same paths and interests and sensibilities as well. No, it's in a way trying to show that there is diversity within. Even if you are a gay man from the Middle East or a queer man from the Middle East, you will be very likely extremely different from this, although we think that Lebanon and Syria are pretty much the same. If you want to compare countries in the Middle East, they're probably the most, the cousins that are most likely or like each other.
Yeah.
So was this something that you wanted to, in a way, portray and insist through this film?
Definitely. I don't think I was consciously trying to do it, but I think subconsciously, yes. For me, I think the finding home in language and finding intimacy in discovering that someone speaks the same language as you was something that I felt was very important for the film. The idea for the film came from a number of different places, but one of the experiences that it came from was I was in London where I was living until 5 years ago, and I was just coming out of a restaurant with a friend, and there was a homeless person who came up and started asking for money in English. I don't look Arab, so people don't know that I'm Arab. But I knew from his accent he was speaking in English, and I knew that he was from the Middle East because I could just tell. And I thought to myself, should I tell him that I'm also Arab? And then I decided to just start speaking in Arabic, and his reaction was really, he was very shocked, and then he was very happy, and he was saying, he just felt like it was very serendipitous that, he approached me and I ended up being an Arab, and he told me his story, and his story is the story of, he's not a sex worker, but the background and that he had to leave, and Calais and all of this stuff is the story of Ahmed. And we were talking for a while, and then I realized I didn't know what he was expecting of me. I had been in London for 12 years at that point.
Did you live in a flat like that?
No. I definitely did not. For sure, I did not live in a flat like that. But I really thought for a second, maybe it was, living in a city like London for so long, I just became very protective. And I could feel myself putting up this wall. And I knew that for him, he didn't have the wall that I had built up after 12 years of living estranged. And that made me feel very distant from him. And I don't think he realized. And then at one point, I said, okay, I went to the ATM machine and I took out some money and I gave it to him and I said, okay, I have to go now, bye. And I could see that he was so disappointed and really upset, because I feel like he felt that this was the beginning of a friendship that we were going to have. And for me, I realized at that point, for whatever reason, that I couldn't be the friend that he was expecting, and that just because he was also Arab, that wasn't enough for me to kind of say, okay, let's have a friendship. But that's just my cynicism of living in a big city for 12 years. You become hard, you become cold. And so I think that emotion was what I was trying to get through this film.
In fact, I wanted to ask you, because there is a moment in the short film, there are a couple of minutes even, when both characters, we see through both the characters that they could have worked. There could have been something that could have worked between them. We see where, though, that magic suddenly disappears. But we saw the magic, we saw the connection through the language, the music and the food and the family memories. We see the complicity between them, and we see how that suddenly breaks. How can we better describe that moment of magic that is created, which goes, I think, a little bit further than just sharing the same language? There is something in Omar, not only in Ahmed, obviously who is in a situation of greater vulnerability and need, but there's something in Omar too that responds to him.
I think for me, Omar is also, and maybe he didn't realize it until that moment in the film, but I think he is also estranged, and he's also had to leave. And I think he easily could kind of forget about it for a while, but I think they recognize that in each other, this idea of being far from home and being very lonely because of it. And I think they, that formed also part of their connection. And I think for Omar, his way of dealing with it is to completely push it away. Whereas for Ahmed, at least at that point in his journey, he still wants to remember home, and he still wants to, feel nostalgic. And for Omar, he couldn't do that to himself, because it would open up the doors that he had closed.
There is something I particularly liked about the short film, and it's that being gay works almost like being gay in a way. It's like a meeting point between them. The spaces for socialization that we have generated maybe, have pros and cons, and here it seems that they met through Grindr. There's nothing wrong with that. And of course, it might generate lots of problems, but in this case, it builds a bridge between them. It generates a bridge, and heterosexuals don't have that bridge necessarily. And so in the end, there's a shared language too, or not necessarily, it's a language that they recognize, and it's brought them together to coincide in the same point. And for Ahmed, it brightens his face when he suddenly realizes that there's that possible bridge between him and the other person. Is it possible to belong to an identity out of the normal standards? Can it make us compatriots almost of a country, an imaginary country? Is it possible to create those bridges in that manner?
Create those bridges based on sexual identity. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, for sure. I can speak for myself. Some of the most formative, some of the most intense and important relationships that I have in my life are the queer relationships that I have. Queer Arab relationships, but also queer relationships more broadly. I think there's, for me, when I came out to my family, there was a period of about 5-6 years where I was quite distant from them. And those, those relationships that I formed during that period, the queer friendships that I formed, were essential to me. It was like a family. And so I do feel that quite strongly. And I think as well, there's the one thing that I feel like is really wonderful about queer relationships, I don't know if this is just me, maybe it is, but is that there's a lot of ambiguity in them. And I think, you form queer friendships, and then they can be intimate, and they can be lovers, and then they can be friendships again, and then you cannot speak for a while. And there's this fluidity that I think exists in a lot of my queer relationships that I really hold on to and I really appreciate. And Grindr brings a lot of them to you, so it's fantastic.
I wanted to ask about making the film itself. I think for those who are not very familiar with the Arab world, shooting films with certain specific subjects is either very dangerous or impossible. So from getting the money, I know making a movie is complicated, it's expensive, but also you need to find the actors. And I know that there is a number of actors who are very professional and who would do any role. But how was it to try and cast for Omar and Ahmed? Was it very complicated? I know it was shot in London, so that helps a lot.
London, yeah, it was really, so for the Omar character, it kind of was, we found the actor very quickly. He auditioned, and immediately as soon as he auditioned, we knew this was the guy that we wanted. But for Ahmed, it was very difficult. There were some amazing Syrian actors that I really wanted, but they were living in the EU, and it was impossible to get them visas to London, to the UK. I even was arguing with the producer because I asked him, is there any way we can move and just film in Berlin? But it was not possible. So that was hard. And then there was one actor that was really, of course, some actors did not want to do a gay kiss or did not want to be associated with being gay, but they didn't really audition anyway, so it wasn't that we didn't see them. There were those who auditioned, and then after they were really great for the role, and then we had conversations, me and the producer, with them, and we interviewed them, and we discovered that they weren't out to their family, and they said, "Oh, it's fine. We'll worry about it later." And for us, we thought we needed to be like, these are young men in their early 20s. We need to be responsible, and even if we explain to them, which we did, this is going to be online. Once you do it, that's it. You're not going to be able to take it back. So we had to make some tough decisions on some very talented people and say that we just don't think it's safe to film them in the role. And then Ahmed is actually a friend of mine. He's Lebanese, and he said, I used to be an actor, and maybe I can do this. And I said, okay, audition, and let's see. And he was really good. I mean, his eyes are just so expressive, and he does a really good Syrian accent. So it was, I got lucky in the end, just through a friend of mine who did an amazing job. In terms of funding it, it's really hard because we wanted to make a film that was going to focus on intimacy between two Arab men, and I wanted to do it on my agenda. I didn't want anyone to tell me what I needed to put inside it. And it's very difficult to get that money because, obviously it's going to be very difficult to get the funding from the Middle East, which all the money is in the Gulf, and that's very hard. But the Kickstarter worked because there are a lot of gay men in the Gulf also, and gay men who have money. And who want to support projects like this. And so I think once we put it out there, we were surprised by actually there was, you're not going to get institutional funds, but you're going to get private donations from...
Anonymous.
Yeah. I mean, I know who they are.
Yes, but
Yeah.
we don't have to know.
Yeah. So that was quite good, I think, in the end.
And you got a prize for this film.
It got nominated. It didn't win.
Uh-huh.
It got nominated. Yeah.
It should have.
Thank you.
Why Pessoa? ¿Por qué Pessoa?
Why Pessoa?
I had just moved to Lisbon, and I was going through a very difficult time in my life, and that book was really, really important for me. You know, at the time reading it, I got a lot of solace and peace, inner peace, and so I just decided at the last minute, when I was flying to London from Lisbon, I just got a copy of the book and I put it on the... It was like a little thank you to Lisbon, a little thank you to Pessoa to just have that book there. Yeah, nothing more than that.
Bueno, pero el desazo...
Well, but
Yeah.
Word and concept.
And it's the mood of the film, is this quiet kind of... that, yeah.
Yo quisiera muy rápidamente...
just very quickly, I'd just like to introduce The Last Night in Guapa for those of you who haven't read it. And it talks about a night in the day of Rasa, in the life of Rasa that Jimena mentioned. And this is a homosexual boy who lives in a city in any old Arab country, and he fights to create a future for himself in an unsustainable social and political situation. But it's not just another day in the life of Rasa. Teta, which sounds better in Arabic than in Spanish, is his grandmother and only family, and caught him in bed with another man. And his best friend is disappeared, and that same night he's been invited to a wedding that will change his life forever. And it is truly a very exciting novel, and the New Yorker described it as being vibrant, tortuous, sensual, caustic, impregnated with blood and smoke. And The Guardian says it's like a breath of fresh air, and that what is personal is political. And this novel, I mean, Jimena has several questions on the novel particularly, I believe, but there's no doubt that it's a bit of an autobiography, is it? Or is it just my imagination? Because I see that I know Beirut, and I think that's not just any old Arabic city in any Arabic country. I see Beirut is reflected in this novel. And after reading your CV, and I've seen you've worked for Médecins Sans Frontières, and Rasa works as a fixer and a translator and an intermediary, and this is very common in the Middle Eastern countries, and helps NGOs or journalists who go to for short periods of time. And that night there's a whole lot of things and emotions in the Guapa, which is a fascinating place, like where anything could have happened almost. And is there anything that's happened to you, Sadid, similar to this?
Well, first of all, the translator who translated the book from English to Spanish, Hector, is here. And so thanks to him, actually, this book made it into Spanish language. So thank you. Is it autobiographical? I mean, no and yes. Emotionally, it's autobiographical. The feelings that Rasa goes through are feelings that I went through. In terms of, trying to come to terms with his sexuality, in terms of coming to terms with his Arabness when he's in North America, because I studied in Canada for some time and I was there during 9/11, and so that experience is also very emotionally autobiographical. The grandmother character is based very much on my own grandmother. And
She didn't discover you. Oh, okay, you don't need to say that. No.
But I mean, so yeah, there's parts that are autobiographical and there's parts that are really not autobiographical. And the relationship is kind of inspired by a relationship that I had, for sure. Although the guy in real life is a much nicer person than Temur, I think. Yeah, so there's a lot that's kind of autobiographical, that even though I wasn't intending to write anything that was autobiographical, kind of ended up that way. And the city, initially, so I didn't grow up in Beirut, actually. I grew up in Kuwait and Cyprus and Amman. But we used to go to Beirut every summer because that's where we spent the summer. And when I was writing, I was trying to decide where to situate the city, and every time I would decide on a place, I would stop being able to write, and I think there's lots of reasons for that. And in the end, I just decided, let me just not name the country and the city, and then just it gave me so much freedom, and I had so much fun taking aspects of different cities across the Middle East and using them. And I was traveling a lot as well. It was during the Arab Spring that I was writing this, and so I was traveling to all these different cities and picking different stuff. And I would like be in a room with activists, and someone would say something, and I would like write it down and put it as a dialogue that someone would say. So it was a really fun process writing the book, and it was very freeing to actually decide not to make it anthropological, that I was going to say, okay, this is set in Amman, and I'm going to reveal to you exactly what the queer scene is like in Amman. I didn't want to do that. Yeah.
Bueno, una pequeña pausa para...
Just a short break. No, it's just to say that the book, The Last Night in Guapa, is available here at the bookshop in Casa Árabe, just in case you wish to buy it. It's the ideal opportunity to do so because Saleem can sign the book for you when you leave. And again, thank you to the Egales Publishing House for ensuring that this book is present here in the publishing world in Spanish, and that it can be read thanks to Hector. Thank you for translating it. And I just want to mention to you that if you want to think about any questions you might have, even people who are connected via streaming and are online, you can ask your questions on the chat, and we can then ask Saleem the questions before the session finishes. Jimena, you have the floor. From reading this novel, we can clearly see the truth that lies in the emotional story of the protagonist, because it's a novel that's so very honest that sometimes you find it's embarrassing almost, the brutal honesty that it conveys, with which the protagonist tells you about such important things, about the development of his identity at the end of the day. Because as we said before, I think that I'd be a bit angry to have to summarize the book as just being the story of a queer in an Arab country, because there are so very many subjects that are interlinked, interconnected in this novel, that it would be a very unjust simplification to describe it as such. It is the story of a queer man in an Arab country, but it is also part of the history of, or a part of a historic moment and a cultural transformation, and it's an analysis that is really a true analysis of the identity that we spoke about before, individual identity, but also a national identity and a cultural identity. One of the things that, well, I had lots of questions actually about the novel, and I think we could talk about a lot of subjects basing ourselves on the reading of this novel, but one of the subjects that drew my attention in particular is that throughout the novel, and this is something that I think is then developed, especially as from the second part of the novel onwards, there's a similarity, there's a parallelism between fear, the fear that the protagonist feels, of them noticing that he's queer or that he's homosexual or gay, or fear about being expelled from his environment because of his homosexual tendency, and his fear of also seeming to be Western within an Arab society. And this is developed particularly as from his stay in the United States and his return afterwards. And so there is, in that fleeing from this not wanting to be related as being queer and also not wanting to appear westernized, it's kind of like there's a negative parallelism between the Arabic nature, or the Arab nature, and the masculinity too. And because at the end of the day, these are, they become a single point that is manifested for the protagonist. Obviously, this is always from the point of view of the protagonist, from the perspective of the protagonist. And I don't know if that's just a perception, that whether you share that idea in terms of how the protagonist sees both masculinity and the Arabic nature of things, and that fear he feels of, he's fleeing always from being seen as queer or as also being very westernized.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. And thank you so much. That's, what you said is very kind. I think, so when I started writing the book, I didn't, I even told myself, this book is a book about revolution. It's not a book about identity and sexuality. And I kind of said, no, I'm a serious writer who's going to write about politics. This is my background, and I was never involved in queer activism at all. This is a political book. And then as I started to write, all of this stuff started coming out, this very personal stuff that you're talking about. And the only reason that I kept it in there was that I told myself, well, this book was never going to get published anyway. I'm an unknown writer, so let me just write and see what happens and not think too much about who's going to read it. And it was very liberating, and then it just became a form of therapy for me to be able to kind of write through all of this. And it is a political book, but I think through writing it, I also came to realize how integral the personal and the political are, and that they're completely inseparable. And so there are lots of parallels between Rasa's own personal identities and how he navigates them and understands them, and how they change as he experiences different things, and how they change as he's also in different environments, whether he's in the US, or whether he's with his grandmother, or whether he's in the poorer part of the city, or whether he's in Guapa, which is the bar where I think he feels the most comfortable. And I think as it comes to how Rasa experiences his sexuality, I think there's so much around the homophobia that he experienced that is tied to misogyny. And I think that's why there's this sense of, this fear that he has about either not wanting to be feminine, or having failed as a man in his duties, to the family, to the country, etc. And these things in his mind are all very mixed up, because you don't know at what point the president of the country ends and the grandmother begins, because they sort of start to become the same person in a way. And I think for myself, growing up, I always had a lot of fear. And it was very hard for me to know exactly where this fear was coming from. I'm also, we were displaced during the Kuwait War, so I was a refugee for some time. So there was, there's a lot of fear, whether it's my sexuality, whether it was that I was not performing my masculinity to the acceptable requirement, or whether I was gay, or whether my home was destroyed and I couldn't go back. So there's all of these different things whether it was the fact that I was living in a police state for a large part of my life. The fear, inside of me was so difficult to untangle, and writing Guapa was my way of untangling the fear somehow, or trying to.
¿Alguna pregunta?
Are there any questions from the public? Marco, he's the true Marco, he's not Ahmed.
Le vamos a pasar el
We'll just give him the microphone. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for your movie. Congratulations. My name is Marco.
Yes.
Not from
Someone
Barcelona.
in London stole your identity.
He's not from Barcelona.
From Madrid. Okay, so I have a question. Do you think, the feeling that I got when I saw these two characters in the short film is that they have a broken soul. So my question is, do you think that in a situation like this, it's almost impossible? I mean, if two broken souls, especially with an exiled like this, can love each other, I have the feeling that they have a mirror, and this breaks the sexual tension and even the emotional, the ability to love each other maybe. So it's like they look to themselves. So what do you think? Is impossible?
Are they able to love?
Yes, I do. I think so. I mean, I think we're all broken in different ways. And so I think when you find someone who is broken in the same way that fits with yours, I do think so. I do, even though my writing and my stories are very sad, and I always feel like I have to apologize because people give me shit about it. Like, why did Guapa end in an unhappy way, which I disagree. Actually, I think it's happy. Or why did Marco end in an unhappy way? Even though I write with a lot of sadness, I'm quite an optimistic person, and so I do believe that two broken souls can find love.
In Spanish we say siempre hay un roto para un descosido.
We always say that there's always a ripped piece of material to be sewn up.
A ver, Douglas, help me out with this. Roto is broken, and descosido is when it's unsewn, right? I don't know if our friends can try this, but there's always...
It's an expression that says there's always something that's ripped that needs sewing up.
Broken souls can probably... Eso es todavía más difícil.
That's even more difficult to translate, unfortunately. Any further questions from the public? Yes. Oh, sorry, I didn't see there was somebody in the public. There is something in the short film and the novel that I found very interesting, and it is that in the end, well, just like anybody who's outside of their place of origin, outside of their normal environment, whether it's a person that's LGBTIQ+, or because he's an immigrant, when you go back home, you've got to pretend you're a person that you're not often. Often you'd have to go back in the closet, and other times you'd have to say you've been successful when you haven't been successful. There are lots of different realities out there. And so my question for you is as follows. What possibilities are there that two people, like the two protagonists in the short film or those in the novel, because in the book we see it a little bit more, when they go back home, might receive the support from their family and be able to come out the closet and say, look, I'm now this person. Is there that real possibility that exists in the Middle East, or is it very, very unlikely?
It's a tough question. I mean, of course it exists to some degree, but not everywhere. For some it exists, for some it doesn't, and it's not even country by country. It's very situation by situation. I guess while you were asking me your question, one thing that I was thinking of was that when you leave your home, you change and your home changes, and then coming back is very difficult because it's like a puzzle piece that no longer fits. Not that it fit before necessarily, but even more. And I think that that's probably a really hard part, and I think that you know, sexuality is only plays one part in this. I think there's lots of other things that changes in you when you leave. And you know, now that I've been away for 15 years, even though I go back every year, at least once, usually
Go back
twice.
where, sorry?
I go back to Lebanon or Jordan. I have family in both Lebanon and Jordan, so I try to go back at least once a year, but usually twice. I still feel like I'm such a different person now than I was, and I don't even know if I can ever really fit back in. Yeah.
Pues tenemos unos minutillos más.
Well, we have a couple more minutes, 7 minutes left. Are there any further questions, Jimena, from you? Yes, and also...
To know what has the reaction been to both your works, mainly in the Arab world. I know that people very often lack role models, and I mentioned that documentary on The Guardian, where people feel very drawn to a band like Mashrua Leila, who actually ends...
In the book also.
Huh? In the book as well? I cannot remember, but in the movie you can hear the voice is so distinctive, that voice. And for many people, queer people in the Arab world, Hamid and Mashrua Leila were, you know, somehow the place where they could relate musically, but in their identity. So I'm sure you have gotten a lot of reactions to both your book and your short film. How have they been? Mostly encouraging, or have you saved someone's life with your book?
I mean, I don't know if I have. The book has been very encouraging, the feedback. I mean, I was not expecting it when I was writing the book. I thought that I thought that the story wouldn't resonate with as many people as it did. And what's been really amazing is that I feel like the book has kind of helped to form a bit of a community, and I kind of see myself as a bit of a lighthouse because I have the privilege to be out and visible, which is a privilege that not everyone has. And there are some people who have the privilege and don't use it. But for me, it was important to be visible, and I kind of see a real positive benefit to that for people who aren't able to be out. So I know that the book has helped people. I wish it would be translated into Arabic because I feel like it would get a much wider audience, but for a number of different reasons, both related to the subject matter but also to the current state of publishing in the Arab world, that has not been possible. The film has been interesting because we made a decision to put it on YouTube, and because it's in Arabic, it's got a huge viewership, much more than the book, obviously, but people watch more than they read. And it's been very interesting because that I think got a lot more viewers in the Middle East who might not have heard about my book. And it's interesting to go through the comments. Sometimes, you know, you get some really positive stuff, and you get really negative stuff as well, obviously. What's been interesting for me is to just distance my work from the idea that it has to represent something or someone. I think I really struggle with that, and I think that it's not a good situation for a writer to be in, is to be seen as a representation or representative of a community. And it's something that I always try and push back on. So I'm a writer, and I'm gay, and I'm Arab, and I write about these issues, but I don't speak or represent on behalf of anyone, and my work shouldn't represent, is not seen to represent people. I remember there was someone who told me, you've put, like, through Marco, you've put such a bad image for Syrian refugees because everyone will think that they're sex workers now. But if that's how you're going to read a film, then you shouldn't be watching fiction. You know, watch a documentary. This is different, and so it's something that I have to always be careful about. But the more stuff that's out there, and I feel like there's much more than when the book was published, around queer Arab writing and film, that makes my job so much easier because, you know, there are other people who do great stuff as well, so it's good.
Jimena?
Hay una cosa que me gusta.
There is something that I really liked, and we were mentioning this about all those crossed identities. And you don't really need to be responsible for being the representative. And there's this claim that the protagonist makes too in the novel, and that is the right to contradiction. And I think it's particularly interesting in this difficult crusade of identities and problems. And there is a scene in particular which is one of the scenes that I most liked in the novel. It's a scene at the beginning of the book, so it's not really a spoiler. It's in the first section of the book when the protagonist, when he's acting as an interpreter for a journalist, is with a revolutionary leader in the city, and well, one of the Islamist leaders, and this leader is telling them about his beliefs and his hopes for a city where they could believe in the future. A city, for example, where all the inhabitants would have a mosque 5 minutes away from their home, a very Islamic state, and even he's showing his rejection towards the feminization that's coming from the Western world, the feminization of men and the masculinization of women that are coming from the Western world, and also towards homosexuality. And the protagonist is not feeling any rejection towards that character who is verbalizing his rejection towards homosexuality. He's thinking about fucking him. And I think it's a brilliant scene, and it's very explicit, where, I mean, he doesn't want Hamid, for this leader to change his beliefs, or Hamid doesn't want him to change his expectations, his hopes. He simply wants him to accept him as he is, and for him to allow him to be who he is and to live in freedom, with freedom. He doesn't necessarily want anything else to change. And he obviously wants to be able to live with those contradictions. And that's the biggest claim that he's making. And I think that it's a very interesting vision, this idea of how I want to be gay, but I want to be gay here. And I think that at the end of the day, it's one of the subjects that runs through the whole book.
Yeah, I think the question of paradox and embracing contradiction is a key part of the novel, and it's something that Rasa keeps trying to do in different ways. Also his desire for someone like Timur, who is like quite conservative, quite masculine, very traditional in many ways, goes against his, like, what he sees as his political revolutionary ideals, and that's something that his friend Maj says, you know, that why are you interested in this guy? He's like exactly what we hate. So I kind of, and so much of that is also within his own internal identity as it relates to his sexuality, what his country expects of him, what his family expects of him. And I think, for me personally, I think I've kind of, I think I felt a lot more comfortable in myself once I started to accept contradiction and paradox inside of me, and that I can hold of paradox and ambivalence about, you know, yeah, let's go protest and let's down with everything, but first let's go get drunk. And it's this kind of like very, ambivalent approach to politics, because I think by the time I finished the novel, it was 2014, 2015, and the Arab Spring was like, you know, becoming a disaster. And I think it was just so much easier to just embrace, irreverence and piss on everything rather than take everything so seriously in some ways.
Pues
Well, I don't know whether you have any last comments because we are running out of time. Well, actually, we've run out of time. But just to allow you, Enrique, to make a last comment, if you like. Yes, I can't resist just making a comment about the hate narrative that are widespread lately, and with the intersection between the Arab and LGBT, at least here in Spain, this has brought about an amazing result. I mean, Spain in itself has an interesting relationship with its Arab past. I myself am from a village called Alpena in the region of Almansa in the province of Albacete, and nobody's ever talked to me about the Arab past of my town and province. And that hate discourse, apart from forgetting 800 years of history, Arab history here in Spain, when anything's said about anything Arabic or Arab or gay, it's as if we should allow those Arabs that are so bad to not come in as refugees because otherwise they're going to hang the homosexuals from streetlights because they want to see us dead. And they say this with total impunity when they make these statements. And so, of course, then there's this trick to make us believe that they are concerned about us. Samuel Luis was kicked to death by Spaniards, probably Catholic Spaniards, and for whatever reason, that murder is not interpreted in the same terms. And so I'd like to know what your opinion is on this way of using identity to put together these narratives of our enemies.
It's kind of funny because when I first started doing, I was doing promotion for Guapa before Brexit and Trump, and then Brexit and Trump happened, and especially a few years down the road, the first questions about the novel were very much situated as like, you and us. You are the backwards Arabs who don't accept X, Y, and Z, and we are the civilized Westerners who, and you're coming here to explain the backwardness of your people. This was very much how I felt when the book first came out. And I guess the last 5 years have reminded us that we're all backwards. And that we have, that intolerance and hate and xenophobia and racism and misogyny exist everywhere, and in many ways it kind of reaffirms my belief in some sort of cosmopolitan solidarity, some global queer solidarity that I didn't feel so strongly about 6 years ago. I feel now that actually there's more room for that because I feel like we're the challenges that we face are very similar. They take different forms, but they're ultimately the same. The overturning of Roe versus Wade last week happened around the same time that the Pride weekend in Lisbon was happening. And the night before, I was having dinner with a Portuguese friend, and he said, I don't think I'm going to go to Pride. I don't think we need Pride anymore in Lisbon. It's fine, everything's fine. We just need to integrate and disappear. And anyway, the younger generation is really super queer and super fluid, and they don't have these identities. And then the next day, Roe versus Wade was overturned, and we were talking, and we were like, this is, you think things are okay, but things are not okay. Things can turn, and the rights that you think that you have are not guaranteed for you.
On that happy note, bueno, la verdad es que ha sido un placer.
Well, to tell you the truth, it's been a pleasure to listen to you, Saleem, and also listening to Jimena and Enrique's questions and all of the questions from the public too. For Casa Árabe, this is a yearly appointment to be able to organize things over these dates. They're difficult dates because it's July and there are lots of things to do in Madrid. It's necessary to go out partying and all sorts of things over these dates. But in the end, it's something that we always want to commemorate and celebrate, and we always want to talk about these things and to think about them. And what better than to bring somebody who is the protagonist in this culture, this LGBTIQ plus, who is Arab and who can guide us to a certain extent. How this is expressed and the different forms that exist. And I love the role of this institution because it's to dialogue with Spanish society and to try to enhance understanding and to extend a bridge that Jimena, Enrique and Saleem have built, and myself too, of course. And hopefully we've been able to have this conversation and share this with all of you. The video will be available if you'd like to distribute it freely between in English or and in Spanish. In English, the English version of the short film is available. We've subtitled it in Spanish, what you saw today, and it will be on our website. But the version in English is available on YouTube for anybody who would like to recommend it or share it, etc. So without further ado, I'd like to invite you to follow us on the social media and to purchase the book, The Last Night in the Guapa. And I don't know if there's any bar in Lisbon called Guapa that we could maybe go to soon. That would be a nice idea. Anyhow, thank you very much and see you soon. Shukran.